All right, y'all. The day is finally here. Seems like we've been waiting forever, but the NFL is finally kicking off its 100th NFL season tonight in Chicago. Bears versus Packers. I'm here for that. I know you're here for that. This is just the first of 256 regular season games, each of which will provide not only a little entertainment, but of course an opportunity to make or lose money. So we're doing everything we can to come out on the right side of that one. And we've got the official NFL game ball for this year, the Duke 100-year anniversary edition, and we're kicking things off in about 6 hours of NFL regular season football, finally. So before that, we're going to recap summer drafting season, where I proceeded with 197 teams on the Play Draft app in the Best Ball Championship Series. If you're not familiar with that, basically just go watch any of my other videos from the summer because they all talk about those contests in depth. Today, we're here to talk about final player ownership and where we ended up with those 197 squads. From a fantasy football perspective, this summer was crazy. And I don't know if this is the new normal in the NFL and what we should expect going forward, or if this year was truly an anomaly. But if we go back to even the Super Bowl, the last game that was played, all the discussion around Todd Gurley's knee, and to be honest with you, sitting here today, we still don't really know the status of Todd Gurley's knee. That was followed by Tyreek Hill's potential suspension and or banishment from the league, which of course turned out to be non-existent. Next up was Melvin Gordon and Ezekiel Elliott deciding to hold out for new contracts. As of this hour, Melvin Gordon is still holding out. Andrew Luck popped up and retired out of the blue unexpectedly. And of course, there were a number of real-life trades that will certainly have an effect on the upcoming fantasy football season. As much fun as drafting season is, this year, honestly, it was a little bit exhausting just trying to track all these player developments, news and tidbits, and some wild swings in player value from one day and week to the next. Of course, we're always trying to buy low, sell high, get out from underneath players in bad situations, but that was particularly difficult this offseason. And my first Best Ball Championship draft was May 29th, about 100 days ago. I look back at some of those early teams, and listen, some of them are certainly drawing dead, including one particularly unfortunate team that has Andrew Luck at quarterback and Lamar Miller at running back. That team's out the window. But on the flip side of that, I was looking back and I saw some squads that I would definitely never be able to put together now in September because some of the guys that I was targeting, their ADP has risen dramatically in the last 100 days. But listen, ADP doesn't matter really. What really matters is what happens on the field. So we can look back and say, hey, 3 months ago, I should have done things differently. Well, guess what? 3 months from now, we're all going to look back to this point, season kickoff, and say, you should have done a few things differently then too. All we can do is put ourselves in the best position we can to win with the information we have at the time. And that time is now. I've drafted 197 teams, and I'm ready to see how it all plays out on the football field. Here's the breakdown. In the $3.5 million Best Ball Championship, $25 entry fee, I entered 99 times. In the $5 Mini Best Ball Championship, I entered 70 times. That tournament filled up, and there was a $5 Mini Best Ball Championship number 2. I entered that one 27 times. And then, of course, the Mega Best Ball, which is a $125 entry fee, I entered once. So in total, I drafted 197 fantasy football teams on the draft app. You know, there were at least 1 or 2 late night sessions where I did fall asleep mid-draft and went on auto pick. So, hey, I don't have the most high expectations for those teams, but it's always better to be lucky than good. So I'm going to show you my full player ownership across all of those entries here in a moment. But before we get to that, based on my previous videos, my friends asked me a couple questions because let's be honest, my friends are really the only ones actually watching these videos right now. Hey, I appreciate you guys. But also shout out to those of you watching this in January 2020 after 12 fluid ounces wins the $1 million championship. We appreciate you being here as well. Thank you for joining us. And that was actually the first question. Why is my username 12 fluid ounces? This dates back to the early days of online poker when I was 21 or 22 and I first signed up for a full tilt poker account. Of course, they asked for a username when you sign up. I looked around the room and there was an aluminum can there. And of course, at the bottom of every aluminum can, whether it be soda or alcoholic, it says 12 fluid ounces. So that's where I came up with the name. If I had it all do over again, I'd probably choose something different. I didn't know it was going to stick with me this long, but I've just continued that as my username in gambling, fantasy football, anything in this realm. I am 12 fluid ounces. And yes, that is a young Hugh Hefner as my avatar image. The story behind that is very similar. When I first signed up for my draft account, it happened to be the same day that Hugh Hefner had passed away. So of course there was a lot of coverage of that, and I had seen that image earlier in the day. It caught my eye, and when it came time to choose an avatar, I went with that one because Hugh Hefner has always been an interesting guy to me. Maybe not for the obvious reasons, but all jokes aside, if you go back and look, this guy truly was a pioneer in journalism, in publishing, and really a progressive individual, even beyond the centerfolds. So obviously I know he's associated with, a smoking jacket and the mansion and the bunnies, and there certainly is appeal to all of those things as well. But if that's all you know about Hugh Hefner, I would really encourage you to go look up everything he did in his life, because he's a true self-made man. He's certainly carved his own path, and that's something I always respect in anybody. So I kind of like it now, and I think I'm going to stick with it. The last question had to do with the little player shields that are next to the avatars and the names in the draft app. So what that's about is it's telling you they are an experienced player. If you have a black and white shield like I do, that means that you have completed at least 500 drafts, or you've won at least $2,500 lifetime. If they have a red and white app, that means that they've either completed at least 1,000 drafts, or they've won $1,000 at least 4 separate times, meaning they've had some big scores at least 4 separate times. So does experienced player mean great player? Not always, but I would say generally speaking, if someone has a red shield, they're probably an above average player. Of course, there is always the guy that's just pumping a lot of money in and continues to lose it. But I think by the time you get to a red shield, you've probably either figured it out or you've moved on to something else. Based on all of the drafting I did this summer, I'm probably going to hit a red shield here in the next couple of weeks. I'm kind of indifferent to it. I mean, honestly, I wish that there weren't any shields at all, but I understand why they do it. It's so that when a new player comes in, they don't just lose all their money immediately to a player that has a lot more experience than them and just frankly understands the game better than they do. So it's helpful to new players, and most of the DFS platforms have some form of this type of system. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of what we're here to talk about today, which is my player ownership across all these tournament entries and what I'm rolling into the 2019 season with from a player standpoint. Before we do that, one reminder, I've mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, my top owned players are often not who I think are going to be the best players at the position, because you can't always get those players. So these are actually players that I value more than my competition, and I'm able to pick up frequently towards the end of a draft. So for example, my quarterback position, my top 2 owned quarterbacks are Marcus Mariota and Matthew Stafford. Again, I do feel great about them as my number 2 quarterback. I think they're a bit of a contrarian play because nobody's excited about them. I think they will outperform their ADP, but I have Marcus Mariota in 22% of my drafts, Matthew Stafford also in 22. Now, if we move on to the next 3 quarterbacks, Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, Phillip Rivers, those 3 individuals I certainly was targeting throughout the summer, and I got a good share of each of them. But if you go down the list here, I think at the end of the day, I probably have at least 1 share of every starting quarterback in the NFL, along with a couple backups as well. To be honest with you, quarterback is probably not going to make or break me or anyone else in this tournament. There's just not enough variance. When you're playing best ball and you have multiple quarterbacks going each week, that's not the position that you really need to focus on. That's why I have a lot of ownership of a lot of different players. Let's move on to running back, where at 40% ownership, Royce Freeman is clearly my number 1 most drafted back. I've been saying it all summer. I do think that he will outperform Phillip Lindsay this season, and I just thought he was too good of a value to pass up in the 8th, 9th, and sometimes 10th round of these drafts. So I end up with a 40% share of Royce Freeman. I put my money where my mouth is, and we'll see what happens with it. Next up, Ito Smith, 34%. This is a player that I might adjust if I could go back in time. I'd probably take a few less shares of him. As I've watched Brian Hill, the other backup in Atlanta, he's impressed me. Although Ito Smith has had a couple touchdowns in the preseason, I think both those guys are going to sort of cannibalize each other for those backup shares in Atlanta. And Ito Smith, we'll have to see how it plays out, but that's a player I probably got a little more exposure to than I actually wanted. Giovanni Bernard, on the other hand, this one's looking pretty good this week because he just signed a new contract. A lot of people were surprised by that because I don't think they thought he had much of a role with Joe Mixon there. Seems that this contract would say otherwise, so I'm very happy to have 34% Giovanni Bernard. Tariq Cohen at 33%. Look, I always knew this guy was a boom or bust type of individual. That's how he's always been in the NFL. I probably underestimated a little bit how much Montgomery was going to take as a workhorse back, a 3-down back in Chicago. But Tariq can be there. Tariq can even play receiver. So I'm not bemoaning the fact that I took 33% of him. But listen, David Montgomery is a little better than I gave him credit for at the beginning of the summer. 3 individual backs that I do want to highlight quickly. Mark Ingram at 33% ownership, Dalvin Cook at 20% ownership, and David Johnson at 17% ownership. Those were the backs that I targeted in all my first rounds and sometimes my second round. But my success this season is probably going to have a lot to do with how well those three perform, because I went with one of them in virtually every draft as my premier running back. One other note, Saquon Barkley at 16% was a little bit surprising to me, because Saquon, as you know, goes almost every time with the first pick. The fact that I have 16% of him tells me that I probably got the number one pick at a little higher clip than average, because if I only got it 1 out of every 12 times, these are 12-team leagues, I would not have 16% Saquon Barkley. I don't actually like having the first pick. That's just too long of a wait between the first and then your second and third round picks. There's a lot of value off the board in between there. But hey, when you're dealt the first pick, you take it. And when I was in that situation, I always took Saquon Barkley this summer. Moving on, Lamar Miller and D'Onta Foreman. Unfortunately, probably neither of those are going to produce any points this season. Those are the perils of drafting early. I felt really great about the Texans running back situation in May. A lot has changed since then. But oddly enough, if you look down here, I also have 21 shares of Duke Johnson, who I primarily took when he was a Browns back. So these things have a weird way of working themselves out. Moving down, a couple of players that I'll tell you I wish I had more shares of. Nick Chubb, only 7. Leonard Fournette, only 6. And Chris Carson, only 4. I feel like I really blew it on that one. But I went very heavy on Ingram, Johnson, and Cook. I think the position that best reflects my actual strategy and embodies my mindset in this tournament is wide receiver. And it's no coincidence that that's also the position I feel the best about going into the season. Now, you're going to see here my top 3 owned wide receivers are all above 50%, which is incredibly high. Probably most people would say far too high. And you might be right. But the way the summer unfolded, these just became the guys that I was pounding the table for. They fell to me more often than not, and I just couldn't resist taking them at their ADP. And John Brown is a great example of that. He's my highest owned receiver, 59%. His ADP has risen about 60 or 70 spots since I first started drafting him in May. So I'm very pleased to have a 59% share of him going into September. Marvin Jones, 54%. I've said it before, I'll say it again now. I think that Kenny Golladay is a talented guy, but the production in that Lions offense has been almost identical between these two receivers the last 2 seasons. And in fact, Marvin Jones has outperformed him in touchdowns. Why take Golladay 3-4 rounds earlier when you can take Marvin Jones for the exact same production later in the draft? Michael Gallup, 52% ownership. A lot of people are now on this one with me because they are concerned about Amari Cooper's foot. And I don't blame him. I'm concerned about it as well, which makes me very pleased that I got a lot of Michael Gallup early when he was less expensive. After that, we dropped down to Trey Quinn at 39%, James Washington, Brandon Cooks, Christian Kirk, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, previously mentioned, Mike Williams, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans. I do want to note that I have 32 shares of Tyreek Hill. That was all over the board, man. I did take a few shares of him in the second round. I took many of him in the 4th and 5th round, and I took a couple of him when he was 10th round and beyond. Moving down to the premier receivers, Devontae Adams, Odell Beckham, Juju Smith-Schuster, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones. I have similar ownership of all of these players. I didn't really go heavily in on any one of them. At the end of the first round, the beginning of the second round, I tried to mix it up and keep it relatively equal between all of those premier receivers. If you go down here at the very bottom, these are pretty much dart throws, guys that, I took here and there, but only in a limited fashion, and a number of them only in one league. Now we'll finish things up with the tight end position, where Jack Doyle is actually surprisingly still my highest owned tight end at 26%. I took a lot of Jack Doyle in the early drafting season. I thought people had sort of forgotten about how good his dynamic is with Andrew Luck in light of Ebron's breakout last year. But come mid-July, I actually had to tell myself to stop taking Jack Doyle entirely because I was too heavy on him at that point. I needed to mix it up a little bit more at the tight end position. Well, fast forward to Andrew Luck's retirement, Colts started sliding down the draft board. In fact, Jack Doyle sometimes didn't get drafted at all 2 weeks ago. So that's when I started drafting him again. We ended up at 26%. Listen, the Luck thing is unfortunate, but if you actually look at the splits, Jacoby Brissett goes to Jack Doyle frequently as well, and his production really isn't that different between Andrew Luck and Jacoby Brissett. So I'm still fine with him as a number 2 tight end and a bye-week fill-in. But the 2 guys I want to focus on here are Evan Ingram and George Kittle at 22% and 21% respectively. I do think you need to have a solid tight end in these tournaments, and my thought process was this. It's hard for me to swallow taking a tight end with my first round pick, so I didn't get a lot of Travis Kelce. I did it a few times, but not frequently. You go down to Zach Ertz, I have the same concerns as everyone else. Goddard is breathing down his neck, and he had immense production last year that I just don't think he's going to be able to replicate again this season. OJ Howard is a fade only because I'm so high on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I just don't think all three of those guys are going to have enough production to be top tier at their position. So for me, OJ was the odd man out, but I do think he's a great tight end. A lot of these mid-level guys I grouped together: Chris Herndon, even though he's coming off suspension, Austin Hooper, Kyle Rudolph, Jared Cook. Listen, we'll see what happens with them. Darren Waller, knock on wood if you're with me. I love that guy's story. I started drafting him in August while I was watching Hard Knocks, as many of you did as well. I'm hoping for the best for him. Get down here to the bottom. I even have one share of Jason Witten. I didn't know that. That might have been the draft I fell asleep on. I hope so, because I don't think I did that consciously. This, of course, is best ball. So my work here is done. There's no trading, no drops, no ads, no waivers. I'm rolling with what I got, and I'm hoping that these players lead me to the playoffs week 13. Out of these 197 teams, I am hoping that 24 or more make the playoffs. That would be just over 12%, which I think would be very successful. If you just got one out of every 12 in, meaning on average, the average player should get one out of every 12 leagues because there's 12 competitors, that would be just over 8%. So I'm trying to go 1.5 times that, and of course, the more the better. So now that all I can do is sit back and watch these teams proceed, my focus is going to shift from season-long to week-to-week DFS. If you didn't know this, you can also play week-to-week on the draft app. There are traditional snake-style drafts as well as auction drafts each and every week of the NFL season. If you haven't joined yet, you should do so. Use promo code 12Fluid. You'll get a bonus. You'll help support this channel. You can also follow me on Twitter at 12Fluid. And hey, I appreciate you guys taking a few minutes out of your day to watch this video. I really do. I hope you enjoy this NFL season, the 100th year of football. Enjoy it, make some money, and I will be back down the road to let you know how it turned out for me. Thank you, guys.